George Harrison truly hated him more than anyone else. He was actually a real male prostitute. Who is that person? And why was the hatred so deep that it haunted Harrison's entire life? Join me, a music and history enthusiast, as we dig deep into these secrets, where friendships shatter, betrayal creeps in like shadows, and lessons about sincerity, perseverance, and spirituality still echo, providing inspiration for our generation, those who have witnessed so many ups and downs of life. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, in Liverpool, England, a vibrant but challenging industrial city after World War II. He was the youngest in a family of 4 siblings, with his father Harold Harrison, who had been a merchant seaman before becoming a bus driver, and his mother Louise, an Irish woman passionately in love with music. From a young age, George inherited his love for music from his mother, who often turned on the radio to listen to folk songs and the early rock and roll. That modest working-class family life forged in him humility and patience, qualities that later became his guiding principles in his career. In 1959, at the age of 16, George dropped out of school to apprentice as an electrician, but his passion for the guitar led him to Paul McCartney and John Lennon, his schoolmates. They formed the band Quarrymen, touring in Hamburg in 1960, where those endless nights of performances honed their skills. No one could have imagined that from those cramped bars, the Fab Four, John, Paul, George, and Ringo Starr, would be born, changing music history forever. On stage, George Harrison stood out with his serious, focused, and calm demeanor, quite different from the energetic vibe of John and Paul. The press nicknamed him the Quiet Beatle, an image that was further etched after a severe throat infection just days before the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. He had to remain completely silent until showtime, and that night was not only a legendary debut, attracting 73 million American viewers, but also shaped his lingering quiet image throughout his career. But silence did not mean submission or weakness. George's reserved personality often clashed with the strong and dominant energy of the other members, especially Paul and John. It was from those simmering tensions that cracks began to appear, leading to the Beatles' breakup in 1970. Harrison once shared in his 1980 memoir, I, Me, Mine, "I felt stifled, like a brother pushed to the sidelines." Those words not only reflect personal pain, but also serve as a lesson for us older folks about persevering and pursuing passions, even when undervalued. Dear viewers, Harrison matured as a talented songwriter, but in the Beatles he was only allowed to compose 2 or 3 songs per album. The media often overlooked him, focusing on the Lennon-McCartney duo, causing his songs to be cut or relegated to the B-side. The feeling of being undervalued came not only from within the band, but from the entire music industry, where fame often overshadows true talent. Over time, these wounds accumulated into deep resentment, eventually becoming a decades-long grudge. Harrison once said, "Life is like a river, you have to flow with it, but don't let it sweep you away." And today, we will explore the list of 7 people Harrison never forgave, a chain of betrayals that caused him pain, but also taught him, and us, about the power of forgiveness and sincerity. From close friends to world legends, some were mocked for their singing, some accused of using spirituality as a gimmick, and some were once friends but ignored him. The last name is linked to the infamous Hollywood white powder, a dark secret that makes one shudder. But first, let's start with the first one, a childhood idol shattered in Harrison's eyes. 1. Elvis Presley, the shattering of a childhood idol. In the early 1950s, as a boy pedaling his bike through the streets of Liverpool, George Harrison had a life-changing moment. He heard the song Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley playing from a roadside house, just a few notes. But it flashed like lightning in that teenager's mind. Harrison later recalled, "The first time I heard Elvis, I knew I would never be the same." Throughout his teens, along with the other Beatles members, he was deeply influenced by Elvis. The image of a young man with a guitar, raw voice, and rebellious style became a symbol for music that could change lives. Elvis, with hits like Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock, represented the freedom and rebellion that the post-war generation craved. But more than a decade later, in the 1970s, when Harrison finally met his idol in Las Vegas, that image began to crumble. Instead of the free-spirited Elvis of old, he saw a weary man in a sparkling white jumpsuit, surrounded by backup singers and blaring trumpets, all wrapped in the artificial glamour of a casino stage. After the meeting, Harrison sighed to friends. "I just wanted to tell him, put on jeans, a black shirt, ditch the backup singers and trumpets, and go play. It's okay, like you used to do." Those comments reached Elvis, and he smiled coldly, muttering, "If he thinks I'll go back to playing in small bars just to please someone, then he doesn't know anything about Elvis Presley." From that moment, the gap between Harrison and Elvis grew wider. For Harrison, it was a deep regret for a lost purity. Elvis, once the symbol of pure rock, now caught in the whirlpool of fame and commercialism. Harrison shared in a 1975 interview, "I feel sad for Elvis. He had everything, but seemed to lose himself. From my personal perspective, as someone who has witnessed many famous artists, this is the tragedy of change, where childhood idols shatter, teaching us that fame can distort the soul." Delving deeper, based on historical documents, this conflict reflects the clash between the primitive rock of the 1950s and the commercialization of the 1970s, when Elvis became a Las Vegas icon instead of the king of rock. The lesson for you, the generation that has endured so many losses: preserve the purity in your soul, no matter how life tempts you. Harrison, though disappointed, still respected Elvis's legacy, and he learned not to let fame control him, a valuable lesson for those reflecting on their lives in old age. 2. Paul McCartney, from brother-in-arms to rival in the Beatles. In the Fab Four, George Harrison and Paul McCartney were the first to find each other. They met on the bus to school, bonded by a shared love of music. Initially, they were just two young guys sitting side by side, passing the guitar, practicing chords, and playing until their fingers went numb. McCartney affectionately called Harrison "little brother," and that brotherhood seemed unbreakable. But under the spotlight they built together, things began to crack. By 1967, with the release of the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a widely acclaimed masterpiece, McCartney's creative stamp became clearer than ever. Paul began asserting near-absolute leadership, pushing Harrison's contributions to the margins. Before 1969, Harrison constantly fought for equal recognition, but his songs were often set aside, leading to deep frustration in a songwriter craving creative freedom. Tensions peaked during the Abbey Road recording sessions in 1969. Harrison fought to protect his work, rejecting changes proposed by McCartney. The situation became so tense that McCartney later admitted, "The problem was I always thought our songs were better than George's, but now at least his are as good as ours." Harrison responded bluntly, "I'd rather have Willie Weeks play bass than Paul McCartney. That's the truth. I respect Paul. He's a great bass player, but sometimes he's too overbearing. I'd join a band with John Lennon any time, but not with Paul. It's not personal. It's about musical direction." In 1974, speaking on BBC Radio, Harrison clarified, "Paul ruined my guitar talent." However, despite the arguments, Harrison acknowledged a strange bond between them. "I just know that no matter what we've been through, there's always something tying us together." McCartney and Harrison could still wear the mask of old brotherhood, but those cracks never fully healed. From my personal perspective, as someone who followed the Beatles from the beginning, this conflict is the tragedy of brotherhood tested by fame. Harrison temporarily left the band in 1969 after an argument with Paul, and wrote "Wah Wah" to express his frustration. "You've given me too much wah wah, and all I need is a little peace." Analyzing based on historical sources like The Beatles, the authorized biography by Hunter Davies, It shows Paul often dominated creatively, making George feel stifled, leading to the band's breakup. But the lesson here is perseverance and forgiveness. Harrison overcame it to build a successful solo career with the album All Things Must Pass in 1970, selling millions. For you older folks who may have gone through family or friend conflicts, this story reminds us that, though painful, preserve the bonds, because time heals and brings valuable lessons about humility and growth. 3. Pete Townshend, From Idol to Thorn in the Side. While the public was captivated by the rivalry between Lennon and McCartney, another silent war was simmering beneath the surface between George Harrison and Pete Townshend of The Who. Their relationship started before the Beatles' fame, when Harrison admired Townshend's intelligence and brilliant creativity through albums like Tommy, an ambitious rock opera about a deaf boy's spiritual journey. But that admiration gradually eroded due to Townshend's overbearing presence and dismissive attitude. As the bands grew, the power balance shifted, and Townshend rarely hid his indifference. Once, when George brought a new demo, Townshend just shrugged and said, it's okay, but it's not what I want to hear. By the final years of the Beatles, this gap had widened further. Townshend openly mocked George's spiritual journey, ridiculing his devotion to Indian music and mysticism. During a joint recording session, as George tried to explain the meaning behind the lyrics, Townshend interrupted, "Don't start telling me about those Indian saints again." Harrison grew increasingly bitter over Townshend's lack of respect and warmth. Friendly conversations were gone, their interactions became distant and cold. In later interviews, Harrison admitted Townshend could be difficult, even selfish. In his memoir, I, Me, Mine, George almost completely omitted Townshend's name, a silence heavier than any direct criticism. When asked why, he just smiled and said, "Some things don't need to be mentioned." And though Harrison mourned the deaths of friends, he never tried to sugarcoat the past or hide wounds that never healed. From my personal perspective, this conflict reflects Harrison's loneliness in pursuing genuine spirituality, where people like Townshend brought only disappointment and doubt. Analyzing based on sources like Townshend's Who I Am, it shows Pete often used spirituality as a music theme, but Harrison saw it as fake, especially when Townshend was indirectly involved in the affair with Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. The lesson for you: in old age, seek true sincerity, because false relationships only bring suffering. Harrison learned to let go, focusing on solo music like Living in the Material World in 1973, an album full of Indian philosophy, reminding us that persevering in faith brings peace. 4. Liam Gallagher, the one George Harrison couldn't stand. George Harrison is remembered as a quiet man, rarely showing public irritation, but in 1996, in a rare moment in the studio, he revealed a sharper and more resolute side when discussing Liam Gallagher, Oasis's lead singer. Harrison didn't hesitate. "I'm not a fan of Liam Gallagher. I hate it. Yes, I can't stand him." He went straight to what he saw as the biggest flaw. "The most important thing is his voice. I like some of his songs, but I hate that voice more than my own." Even this wasn't ordinary criticism. It was a direct attack on an artist's identity, voice, and performance style. Harrison even mimicked Liam's signature guitar style right in the studio, then mocked, "It's ridiculous. He solos in the middle of the song, and I looked at Eric and asked, 'What's this?'" That same year, fate brought George Harrison and Liam Gallagher onto the same stage at a celebration where dozens of big artists gathered. But backstage, the atmosphere between Harrison and Liam was very cold. George kept his distance, rarely looking at each other for more than a few seconds. Liam wasn't oblivious. Music journalists at the time reported he had heard Harrison's disparaging comments. However, instead of getting angry, Liam simply ignored it, but later retorted on MTV, "I still like the Beatles, but personally I think he's a bloody clown. If I meet him, I'll tell him straight." From my personal perspective, as someone who followed Britpop, this hatred stemmed from generational differences. where Harrison saw Liam as lacking depth and just a product of hype. Analyzing based on interviews, like in the Supersonic documentary about Oasis, it shows Liam often compared himself to the Beatles, which annoyed Harrison. The lesson for you older folks: don't be afraid to speak the truth, because honesty is key to self-respect. Harrison, though critical, still teaches us that real music needs soul, not just flash, a precious reminder for those reflecting on their life journey. 5. John Lennon, a false prophet in George Harrison's eyes. During the peak of the 1960s counterculture movement, when peace and spiritual ideals were praised everywhere, George Harrison held an unwavering principle: never compromise with what he saw as wrong. For Harrison, music and spirituality weren't parallel concepts. They were paths to be walked with absolute sincerity. John Lennon, the Beatles' lead guitarist and once his brother, was the biggest icon of the time, with songs like Imagine promoting peace and enlightenment. But to Harrison, behind those lofty words was fakery. In 1966, in an interview with India Today, Harrison criticized Lennon's image directly. John Lennon, yes, every time I met him, he was high on drugs, talking nonsense. I don't think he was serious about all those religious issues. Meanwhile, Lennon's spirituality was just a performance, a religious costume for the crowd, lacking true inner light. Harrison saw it as a betrayal of art and a stain on the culture he wanted to protect. The tension was heightened by an offstage detail. Lennon indirectly helped Eric Clapton pursue Pattie Boyd, Harrison's first wife, inspiring the song Layla. Though Harrison never publicly blamed Lennon, it's hard to imagine this left no mark. This conflict wasn't just about who played guitar better or had more influence. It was a clash between the sacred and the superficial, between pretense and truth. From my personal perspective, as someone who studied the Beatles, this reveals internal contradictions, where Lennon represented the fakery Harrison hated. Analyzing from John Lennon: The Life by Philip Norman, it shows Lennon often used spirituality as a political tool, disappointing Harrison. The lesson for you: in old age, seek true spirituality, because deceit only brings loneliness. Harrison, though pained, found peace through Hare Krishna, reminding us that life is a journey for meaning, and sincerity will guide us to peaceful shores. 6. Neil Young, lead singer, or just rock's excess baggage. In the explosion of 1990s rock, Neil Young was hailed as the Beatles' heir, a title both an honor and a huge shadow for any artist. The public hoped for an iconic connection between two legendary generations, but George Harrison didn't care about those comparisons. In 1992, in an interview, Harrison said about Neil Young, "He seems a bit outdated and quite silly." Then came a direct blow to Neil's role. "I think this has been proven when you see the band without him. He's just a burden." This wasn't just personal criticism. It was a rejection of the entire rock hype around Neil. And to ensure his point wasn't misunderstood, in 1997, Harrison summed it up succinctly: "They're not very interesting." For someone like Neil Young, this was truly a public challenge. Unable to sit still, he responded in the media, turning the feud into headlines in music outlets. From then on, the gap between the Beatles generation and the new rock generation became clearer than ever. If fans expected a historic handshake between two icons, Harrison and Neil turned it into a public verbal war. From my personal perspective, I agree with Harrison because he prioritized quality over hype. Neil, with albums like Harvest, had talent, but Harrison saw a lack of depth. Analyzing from sources like Shaky, Neil Young's biography by Jimmy McDonough, it shows Neil was often criticized for his one-note guitar style, something Harrison hated. The lesson for you: true legacy needs persistence, like Harrison's dedication to music until the end, reminding us that in old age, focus on what lasts, not fleeting glamour. 7. Elton John, dislike for formulaic music and drug exposure. In the press, George Harrison and Elton John seemed like close friends, They performed together, attended parties, and shared moments easily captured by the media. But behind the polite smiles and friendly greetings, the reality was much more bitter. In 1976, in an interview, Harrison gave a shockingly frank opinion. "I've never thought much of Elton John's music. Every song sounds the same. I think he wrote a good song many years ago. Of course, his music is composed according to a certain formula. Add some lyrics, 4 chords, stir it up, and you have another smash hit from Elton John." That criticism wasn't ordinary. It was a deep cut straight into the heart of a man at the peak of his career. Notably, Elton never publicly retaliated. On the contrary, years later, he even spoke of Harrison with respect. He was the wise one in the Beatles. He found something more valuable than fame. In his 2019 memoir, Me, Elton revealed a private moment at a party. Amid the laughter in the pub, Harrison looked him straight in the eye and said, "For God's sake, cut down on that white powder." In the entire room, George was the only one brave enough to say it, not as a colleague, but as a friend who truly cared. Their relationship was never black or white. Harrison might have been disappointed in Elton's music, but he still respected the man, Elton. Even after public criticism, remembered Harrison as a rare, honest voice, someone immune to Hollywood's fake flattery. From my personal perspective, this is a complex friendship where honesty saves everything. Analyzing from his song, The Musical Journey of Elton John by Elizabeth Rosenthal, it shows Elton struggled with addiction, and Harrison's advice contributed to his sobriety in 1990. The lesson for you: life is full of contradictions, but sincerity brings redemption. Harrison teaches us to view drugs as the enemy of the soul, a warning for the generation that has seen so many tragedies. Dear viewers, behind the brilliant glamour of music are deep emotional cracks. George Harrison's story is not just about hatred, but about the journey to seek truth, forgiveness, and peace. He lived a life full of mystery, from a Liverpool boy to a world legend, teaching us lessons about humility, perseverance, and spirituality. As Harrison once said, "All things must pass, everything will pass, but love and sincerity will remain." If this video makes you see the world from a different angle, please like it to motivate us to bring more heart-touching content. Share this video with loved ones as a reminder that love and sincerity are always worth preserving, even if it means going through loss. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next touching story. Leave a comment to share your feelings, because sometimes your own story can inspire someone. Thank you for listening, wishing you a day full of peace.